Hey everyone, uh, promised a overview and a little bit of an explanation of gameplay for Halls of Montezuma, and I think I'll start out with just a little bit of explanation of the counters first, and then the map, and then the cards. Combat units are fairly simple, as you can see by this Mexican unit here. Has a nice iconographic of the cavalry member. Denotes the unit name or nomenclature, third. And obviously the colors makes the difference between the US player and the brother. Hey everyone, this is my promised video, or maybe sequence of videos, going over the gameplay units map, kind of an explanation of how Halls of Montezuma plays and how everything fits together. I know the biggest issue of this game for many people were the rules and trying to get their head or wrap their head around how it exactly played out. And I found the same challenges, although you definitely should download the up-to-date living rules. Helps a lot, especially some of the errata that you can't play without, specifically on the opening setup, which we'll get into after this initial video on the components. I want to start out with the counters, and specifically the combat units. Fairly simple and elegant display of the units and what they entail, what the symbols signify. You notice there's no movement points on any of these combat units because they can't move without a leader, and the movement is predicated on a card that you will draw, which we'll get into later. So all you have is the graphic of the type of unit, whether it's artillery, cavalry, dragoons, regular infantry, etc. You can see obviously the difference between the earthy tan color of the Mexican units and then the blue of the US units. The large number is simply the combat factor. You can go all the way from, I think 4 is the largest, and then half is the smallest. Although sometimes when they're flipped, you end up being 0. Let's get these into the camera. You can go down to 0. But the interesting thing is the combat factors really only count in terms of, again, we'll get into later, but if you're a lead unit in a battle, then you would use the combat factor that's listed. If it's a committed unit, which only units with this flag symbol or the stars on the US units, if they have those, they can be committed to a battle, which doubles their combat strength. There's also a risk involved in doing that, or a payment, I think you'd probably say. So that this one would turn into 8. But even for units that are ones or halves or zeros, when you flipped here on this Maryland unit, they'll still be able to contribute to the battle. And that's because if you go over to here on the, let's see if we can get right there. Once you set up your army for battle, you can see lead unit, committed units, and then all other units are actually 1 firepower each. So if a unit has a half or 0 factor showing, they still count as 1. So that's actually kind of a cool mechanic that is quite different in this game. I'd say the battle sequence is one of the most unique I've seen, and probably takes the most to get into, because it is so different than a lot of other games. So basically the unit has combat factor, and then each unit will have a couple steps. So once they lose a step, you flip, and these are very fragile. Once you get units that are flipped and they go into battle, there's a much higher likelihood you're going to lose those completely. So each have the 2 steps, and you just flip and then take away as the game progresses. Leader counters. This is an example of a Mexican leader. I'm going to take a U.S. leader, Winfield Scott, in comparison here. This first factor, the 1 here or the 2 here, is simply how many or what level their leadership is in terms of moving units. When you get to let's see here, if I can, there is a 4. If I reach over and find wool, and that's not good. Being a 4 is not good. I think he's the only 4 leader in the game, if I'm not mistaken. There's a number of 3s and a few key 1s like Santa Anna and Winfield Scott. But in any case, this is what you'll look at when you draw a card for movement. As you can see here, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4. So their strategy rating. When you draw that card, it will give you the number of movement points that particular force can move with that leader. Up. And then the middle number is the number of units that particular leader can control and move, and that includes any other subordinate leaders that it may have under control. So if Scott is controlling 4 units of his own, and then he's got Wool also under his leadership, Wool could have 4 units. You can see his 5 there, and then Scott could command that whole force. If Wool had 5 and Scott had 4, you would have to leave 1 behind, because Scott could not move a force of 9 units. I think 8 is the maximum. Winfield Scott and Santa Anna can move 8 units. Sorry, I got interrupted there for a second. Back to the leader counters. The other important mark on the leader counters, and they're only going to have two possibilities, and that's either 1 star or 2 stars. And that is important because of how many committed units you can do in a particular battle. So if you have 1-star general, they can only commit 1 unit. So 1 unit could be doubled in firepower, and we'll get into that in battle. And if it's 2-star, obviously 2 units can be committed. Obvious advantage to have a 2-star general. So you'll see, and then when I got interrupted, I forgot about the bottom right is tactical rating, so that can affect battles when you meet the enemy. So as you can see by this, lower number on the left is best, 1. High number in the middle is best, and higher number on the right is best, and obviously 2 stars is best. So as you can see, historically it makes sense. Winfield Scott is probably one of the best leaders in the game. Santa Anna is close behind. I think Winfield Scott's the only 2 tactical rating. So that gives you an idea of how important that he is as a leader. Some of the other markers. Let's go over to the game board, back up a little bit. Each of the states, as you can see outlined here by the bold lines, each of the states has a holding box for control of the state, and as you might expect, Mexico controls all the states in its territory. If the U.S. gains control, you'll flip like that. Simple. As the game goes on, you'll find out whether states are in revolt. All the states except for 1 are calm, and then as they revolt, you just flip that over to the revolt side. Some of the other markers that are important, you can see an army marker. Armies, you see +3F. That is going to increase if you're able to form an army with a commander and then move with those units that are in the army. You'll be able to have +3 on your force level, which is a pretty big deal. -1 is for movement. So obviously advantages for coordinating when you have an army like that, so you get quite a bit better in battle, but it's also a little harder to move an army as well, so there's -1 to their movement. And Mexico has those as well. Baggage train, there are 2 baggage trains in the game, 1 for each side, and that has to do with supply. So if an army has a baggage train, as they're traveling, they don't have to worry about being out of supply, and being out of supply is a big deal in this game. So that's important when you're doing a major push with an army. The PW markers have to do with political will. I'm going to flip one, even though I'm not supposed to see this. If a state is conquered, or sorry, if a city is conquered, that will push the political will one way or the other. Usually it'll be an extra. You can see there's a +1 already, and some of these are randomly placed at the beginning of the game. So this one actually, political will go down compared to this +2. We'll get into at start on the second video, but it's actually the political will markers are the ones that were not put in the original at start. So when I first started the rules, I was totally confused. I thought, what are these PW markers? And they don't say anything about them in the setup. So those are randomly placed. There are some other markers that you'll find to be important at start. Political will. It's the most important part of the game, because if you break the political will of Mexico as a U.S. player, you will win the game. And if you keep it up to a certain level as a Mexican, you'll win the game. These markers here are used in battle, and we'll talk about that more specifically when we get into the game. There's a heat marker, reshuffle marker. This is useful for placing in a space, because you're really going to, when there's two large armies, you're going to have to take them off to their respective sides in their setup with a lead unit, etc. And you put this in the space where there was a battle. And then you'll remember where to put your units back afterwards. Raid markers are important. They can be placed through an event draw and by either player, and they will help cut off supply. Again, very important part of the game. There are U.S. East and West Coast ship markers, fleet markers, and some of the markers. Oh, I was going to talk about. There's a place for the government being stable and unstable that you keep over here, and also both sides. During the game, or during your turn, you can take replacements, and this just is a way to flip. So you can denote that you've already taken your replacements. So you can't do it again that turn. Both sides have that. As we get to the cards, we'll talk about the logistics counter here. Whether the logistics phase has happened yet. Some of the other markers, trenches, or not trenches, but fieldworks type counters, which interesting, because you draw them randomly, you put them in a cup, and all the Mexican side in a cup and all the US side in a cup, and then when you build one, you'll actually draw it from that cup, and you won't know exactly how much it's worth until you draw it, and then you put it face down like this with a question mark up, and the opposing side doesn't know how much defense it's going to add when they attack, so there's a little bit of surprise there. That's a nice twist. These are simply markers for control, so you don't have to put them in Mexico, and you don't have to put them in Texas until one of the opposing sides captures. So if I put one down here, if the US have taken that particular city. There are various markers for events that happen. These are counters specifically for card events that you can play, and it tells you what happens by playing that card. and it will also show you, usually you can only play it once per game. So there's a counter to show you've played it, and you can't use that anymore. I think that's it for counters, and some of them will come up in gameplay, but really quick look at the cards, and this is the key to the game as far as how you play. It's definitely a card-driven game. It's not a card supplement game. It's a card-driven game, something like Paths of Glory. You could think of it in those terms, with some twists. Now there's a deck they call the event deck. They also say strategy, but it's basically the same thing. And there's several things in a card that you need to be familiar with. First thing, there's a split with the event deck, in that this card on the left says Crisis, so all of these are what you start the beginning of the game with. You need to pull those out of the event deck and use only these cards. You'll shuffle them except for the Tejas card, which the Mexican player starts with. Then these, once war's declared by the US, then you shuffle all the remaining. There's quite a few, there's a lot more cards, and they become a part of the deck from there on. Okay, so the number in the far upper left is the operations points, and if you are going to move, if you have a 3 like this, you will need a general that is a 3 or less. So if I'm going to move, I can play this card, and then I can move this general. So that's a part of your turn. Play the card, use the 3. Obviously, 3 cards. There's not as many 4, and there's that one general that has 4. So the only way that general could move on his own is if you get a 4 card. So obviously the 4 cards are the most valuable. They can also move fleets, and you can have invasions when you have the 4 card. That's where the ship symbol comes in. Okay, so 3 is the ops point. You can also play it for the event. In this case, the US could play the card, draw 2 US units from regroup, and place in a disputed zone. So that's a positive for the US. You can see the difference in the color. This makes it obvious. The blue is an event that's more favorable to US. Green is more favorable to Mexico. And if it's split, green, blue, obviously either side could use it to their advantage. So again, those of you familiar playing card-driven games, this is makes sense. If you haven't before, the big thrust is when you organize your hand during your turn, you're going to want to use if you're a Mexican player, you're going to want to use these cards for their ops value. You're not going to want to use the events, because that's obvious disadvantage to you, and vice versa with the US player. If a card is played and you see this wagon symbol, that means that there's a chance that you will have to check for logistics, which is basically attrition. And you'll roll the die, and if it's 3 or less, that means you're going to have to do logistics, which has to do with possible loss of units if they're unsupplied. So playing a 4 with I'm not sure if there's one like that. I see 3-1. Yeah, there's a 4. So playing a 4 is going to be a high risk to go through that attrition part of the turn. And what happens is if you have already done the logistics for that turn, you don't have to worry about the supply for the rest of that turn. So it's a little bit less of a risk in moving out of supply. Except for in terms of battle, because you don't want to be out of supply in a battle. Then there are cards that say remove. So if you've used the event on this card, you'll have to remove it from play, and you can't use that anymore. And there's quite a few of those where that's the case. If there is a blue section that says response, that means you can use the event as a response to something that's happening at the moment. It could be something in response to what the other player is doing, could be in response to battle. A lot of times the responses have to do with adding factors to our strength to the battle that you're in. So those are a little bit more immediate kind of events, specific to things that are happening on the board. Other than that, I think that's it for event cards. And the other important cards, it's another kind of cool part of the game, I think, are these, or this action deck. There's not tons in here. You'll cycle through these and probably have to shuffle at least once or twice as you complete the game. But there's 2 parts to these. At the beginning of each turn, you will draw a specific number of cards per player, alternating. I think the Mexican player starts at the beginning and he gets first draw. So you'll draw a card during this phase of the turns, very beginning, and then you'll look at the event or the directions to place 1 friendly raid marker in any space with within 10 movement points of an Indian space. So that can go, for instance, you can see little, these tomahawks here. So that's considered Indian space. So within 10 movement points, that can be quite a ways. And again, those raid markers are for cutting off supply. You can also earn political will points if they're still there at the end of the turn. So you do the event, or all the directions. Here's one, California War, turns 1 to 7. Move a political will 1 in your favor and place 1 unit from regroup into the Alta California box. A lot of times you'll get actually reinforcements, like this card. Draw 1 friendly leader, and plus units up to his command ready from your group. So that's a way to get reinforcements at the beginning of your turn without calling for replacements on your own. So those are kind of nice. Nice twist to the beginning of each turn. Then during the turn, as you are moving, let's say, well, let's use Generalissimo Bravo. He's got a 3 strategy rating, and he wants to move during the turn. I simply play the 3 or 4 ops point card, use that up, and then I draw this one from the action deck, and you simply look under the 3, and it says he has 5 movement points, and it's simple as that. You can see the range now. There's a randomness to this. So you could have Winfield Scott draw this and get 0, which would be a bummer, but it can happen. In this particular card, the worst leader actually gets the most movement points, but again, it's just a way of randomizing movement points. And if you have a line underneath a number, that means you'll have to check for attrition, which is also a bummer. I just did a quick, I didn't do all 4, but I did a quick sum and division of the number of movement points total in this deck if you are a 1 leader, which is the best. And the average movement points would be about 5. And if you have a 4 leader, the average leader on the draw would be about 4 movement points. So there's a difference of 1 full movement point in a randomization, and the difference between a 1 and a 4 leader. So, and then let's really quickly look at the board. And you can see that it's divided up into circles and occasionally circles with the rough edges or the pointy diamond shaped around them, and also ones with bold squares, and then these couple that are actually fortresses. We can get over here, yep. And also on Veracruz. And those are simply places, including these, what they call transition spots, and places where you have to land on as you're moving. It's just point-to-point system. These dark brown lines are the outlines of each of the Mexican states. And then we have Texas up here, and Alta California has a separate box, and Baja California has a separate box. And then there's disputed zone right here. As far as movement goes, basically, it's interesting that on the train chart they say 0 for roads, but it means there's nothing added when you move from, say, here to here. It costs 1 to go to the next spot on the map. And then so roads just means you're not going to add any. If you have, say, you're looking down here in these rough terrain, it's going to add another point to movement going from here to here. If you go up here, you see these kind of blocky dark lines. That's crossing a river, so that's also going to cost you more. They're pretty good about it. If you're colorblind, this can be, I'm sure, problematic, because they do have different shades for each of these cities from each state. So you can see this encompasses 4, I believe that's right, yep. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the other, excuse me, the other part of that is they were good about putting the first two letters of the state name on the sites. So if you're not great with the shading, and some of them are very subtle, you can always look for here, and they'll have DU for Durango. And the number in the control box, if you look down here on Zacatecas, that will be, notice the arrow going to this region because it's hard to fit that in. The 3 is how many of these you will need to control in order to control that particular state. And you have blockade markers, and also, or not blockade mark, but possible places for amphibious landings for the US. And we talked about Indian sites here. And up here you can see you have to go from here in order to get to the disputed zone. There's also a place here and a place here. And then of course a place for your generals on either side. And you can put military units in their particular boxes. And I like to, if say Santa Anna is controlling Arista, I usually put Arista in his box, and then keep Arista's units in his the Arista box, so you can show that they're traveling together. I think some of the other things will come up as we get into gameplay, but that's just an overview of what the counters, the board, the cards, those 3 key things. Hopefully that didn't get too confusing. But I think in a little, maybe within a day or so, we'll get into the setup and then the first turn. Hopefully go a little quicker. Thanks for watching. Hope you get into this game. If you've got it, hope this helps you get a little farther into the game. And we'll see you next time.